Good morning, afternoon, or evening, as the case may be to everyone. I'd like to thank you for taking some time to join us here to take a look at unified messaging. Unified messaging is an extremely interesting solution, and I think we'll find in today's session you'll get some pretty good answers in terms of the questions that might have come up and maybe some directions in terms of where you should go from here. We'll talk a little bit about our company, AVST. Not a lot, because mostly you're here to learn about the solution, and that's what we want to focus on. We will then take a look at some of the options that you can have. Unified messaging is interesting. It's been around long enough where there's a number of ways to deploy it. Everyone has a slightly different idea on how you should do that. And if nothing else, when you leave this webinar, you should understand the ways of deploying it, and those will help you make the choices you need to make for your enterprise. And lastly, we'll kind of sum it up with 5 considerations, just a quick checklist you can use as you look at moving forward and evaluating a unified messaging kind of solution. And then, as was said before, we'll open it up for question and answers at the end, and hopefully there'll be some questions. And remember, anything that you're curious about, there's for sure someone else that just didn't have the courage to ask. So you'll be helping out your fellow attendees as well. So if you look at AVST, we're kind of the unknown player here. It's surprising we compete against the giants, most of whose names are household words. And sometimes people are a little worried about whether we're the new kid on the block, and we're certainly not. We've been around in this industry for over 25 years. We've got over 40,000 systems sold and deployed out there. And we're recognized in the industry for both our innovation and our product history. Whether it's Gartner's report that talks about our position in the voicemail and market, or the Frost & Sullivan report that talks about the concrete ROI that the solutions we offer will give you, or the ComFusion report that lists us as one of the most forward-looking and advanced players in this market. All of these are just alluding to the fact that we've been here for a long time, we've had a lot of customers for a long time, and they've given us an incredibly good amount of feedback. And based on that feedback, we've grown and changed this product over the years. Till now, it really is a premier player for unified messaging. We actually deployed the first unified messaging solutions back in 1991, so we have a nice 15, 16-year solid history of looking at this solution and figuring out how to deploy it in a wide range of enterprises and a wide range of sizes of companies. So what we're going to do today is kind of give you the benefit of that experience and talk about our solution and how we see it fitting in the market. Always nice to have some slide up that talks about our successes. And what this one does, besides letting you know that we're a solid player in the market, is it sort of talks about 4 areas where we tend to be very, very successful. In the general enterprise, whether it's food, service, financial, all of those, the kind of problems those companies have, the communications problems, are exactly what we address. And those same types of problems really move horizontally in most types of industries. So in education, whether it's higher education or the lower schools, in the government, whether it's a city, county, or even a federal government agency, and certainly into the healthcare industry, what we found is the unified messaging solutions we provide are of great benefit to those people. And as we've been rolling them out over the years, we've tuned those solutions to make sure that we address the specific needs, not only in those verticals, but horizontally for almost any type of customer. And one of the reasons we can do that has to do with who we are, how we were founded. We're not owned by a PBX manufacturer. We're the only significant player in this market who isn't owned by someone who primarily makes another product, PBX, routers, etc. And what that does is it gives us a very unique focus on our product. And our focus tells us that we should be able to make a product that fits into any enterprise. And not only should it go into any enterprise, but it should support the existing pieces of infrastructure that are there. Last thing we want to do is deploy a solution that has hidden costs for you that requires you to upgrade your software, change something out, change your architecture. So we've designed our system to fit in seamlessly no matter what. Whatever type phone system you have, whether it's a legacy TDM type PBX or a newer IP type phone system, we're going to integrate with that without any issue. And you're going to be able to change that switch anytime you want, knowing Call Express integrates to everything on the market. We not only support all the popular email systems, certainly Exchange, Notes, GroupWise, but we also support any IMAP 4 system. So higher education, anybody that has an IMAP system, we're basically going to be able to offer unified messaging across the board. And then we take a look at sort of this latest piece, which is the new architecture types for telephony. If you have more than one telephone system in your company, then you look at centralization and distributing call processes and that's a very flexible area for many companies. Rest assured, Call Express can be configured in any of those environments, and it also allows you to change those environments as you grow without having to replace any of the products or any of the software. So if we actually look at what's going on in the industry in general, and this is not just unified messaging, but this is the communications and data industry overall. Right now, everyone's struggling to reduce costs. It's a tight economy, and of course the goal is to leverage that existing infrastructure. For maybe 5 years in the past, people have been looking at moving to an IP type, voice over IP type solution, and people are still looking, but now the move's slowed down a little bit with people thinking, what I want to do today is spend money on my infrastructure that gets me money right now. Not so much for the future, but let me lower costs today. Let me make my management simpler. Let me control my employee expense. And as I do that, whatever I deploy, I really want to make sure that that's going to fit in whatever new architecture I pick. And then they're looking at productivity. Certainly, employee expense is the highest, or if not one of the highest expenses for any organization. And so what tools can I deploy today that will make my employees more productive and more responsive? And for productivity, unified messaging is one of the key elements in the unified communications world that's actually already today out, deployed, and returning true value. And there's certain things we do to enhance it with speech recognition access and mobility to connect to the devices, but the general concept of unified messaging is really tried and true. We're going to look at some numbers that talk about surveys and things in a second, but it really is one of the things you can do today that address that productivity issue. And then the last piece is looking at ways to improve the business processes. All these things can be done today in your environment, and most of them without requiring major investments. Reducing that latency for customer communications is a major focus for many people. Trying to retain those customers you have in a time when budgets are tight is certainly a good move. And one of the things we can do with this is by shortening the message retention time, or the message response time, we can actually take and help you maintain those valuable customers. So while you're off in the business of gaining new customers, you just want to make sure you aren't maybe losing some of those existing ones. So if we look at unified messaging itself, and we're going to describe kind of what we believe it is and how it gets implemented, but it's really about access to messages. Easier access, more productive access to all your message types, voice, fax, and email. And not only access to all your message types, but access from the terminal or the device you'd like to use, the most appropriate one. So certainly it's easy to see that sitting at our desks at work, we have an email client. We spend much of our day inside there. And putting a voice and a fax message into that email client makes it much easier to handle. I can now group all my messages based on subject, based on promotions and programs I'm working on. And I can use the same way of working, the same kind of triage of the email inbox to look for important messages to cover all my messages. But it goes beyond that, because for some of us, working at a desktop all day long isn't an option. So what we now need to do is extend that same single focus out to other devices for other environments. So you certainly can go out, and when you're out and about, you can grab a web connection. And using web access, you can probably get to your email system. So it'd be great if you could get to your voice and fax as you're getting your email messages through a web connection. Perhaps you have a mobile device, a BlackBerry device, and you're handling your email through that when you're mobile. Once again, having all your message types on any device you're using is really what the goal is for this. We want to reduce the time to process messages, but we also want to extend the time that messages are available and reduce the amount of time it takes you to get a message, read it, process it, and respond to it. There's actually a study out that talks about message management with unified messaging, when we're able to take all our message types and put them into a single tool, that saves anywhere from 50 to 75% of the time we spend handling messages. Now, if you think about time at a desk where you would actually be in your email, reading your email, the light would come on your phone, you'd stop, you'd call in, you'd log into your voicemail, you'd then basically listen to those messages, and then you'd get up and go out to wherever your fax machine was and get your fax messages. Then you'd come back with all that information and sort of try and tie it together by subject. It's pretty easy to see how looking at it all on one screen, having it in one simple place to manage, will allow you to be more productive and more responsive, because you'll know about all those messages in a much more timely manner. And that same concept actually is magnified when you go mobile. If you imagine out at lunch, you've just finished lunch and now you're worrying about a couple of projects you're working at, and now you have to go somewhere to get your email, and you have to call in to listen to your voicemail, and then maybe transfer out to an administrator to ask if you have fax messages. To have all those pushed real time to your mobile device, much, much more productive for you. And that response time gets greatly reduced. All those functionalities are part of unified messaging. But behind that, and not quite as visible, is the architecture you're going to use to deliver that. Unified messaging is one of those solutions that connects key elements in your infrastructure. It connects your phone messages with your email system, with your faxes, with your network, with your groupware. And those connections all need to be built in such a manner that not only do they deliver the functionality you want, but they also match certain corporate directives. And we're going to look at those when we talk about how to connect unified messaging. Certainly the interoperability with the email system is the first and key piece, and we've been doing that for a long time now, and we're completely comfortable with any type of email you have. We can give you unified messaging. Now the feature mix varies a little bit from email to email, but not noticeably. The functionality is going to be there no matter what email system you have once you take the time to roll it out. We can support up to 10,000 users using unified messaging on a single call express system today, and that number actually doubles in our next software release. So I'm guessing no matter what your enterprise is structured like, Call Express is going to fit your needs to be looking at getting that value from unified messaging. The industry's all excited about unified messaging in the last few years. Now, mind you, we shipped our first unified messaging product in 1991, and it was fairly slow going in the early days to convince people of the value of unified messaging. It was early in the early days of LANs and of email systems, and there were a lot of challenges. But slowly over the years, as we started rolling this out for more and more customers, we've learned from those customers what types of features they have, what types of connectivity they want to have. And the market's got more and more interesting, and in the last few years, it's absolutely blossomed. Right now, the studies talk about 75% of the enterprises plan to roll out between now and 2010. And frankly, that's purchasing decisions you're evaluating today. They're talking about the market doubling in size, and that's a pretty good step. To be in a market that's doubling in size is a good place to be. And as we look at the deployment of IP technologies, which is another area of the technology that's really getting a lot of focus right now, we need to kind of do two things. First, we need to focus on the fact that this unified messaging functionality works fine with the new IP technology. But we also need to keep in mind that the unified messaging functionality isn't tied to IP. The same functionality we're talking about today will work fine on a new IP phone system or on your legacy phone system. In fact, you can purchase unified messaging today with the system you have, knowing full well you can go to any IP phone system and not lose a bit of the functionality that Call Express provides today. So in an environment where you have a number of solutions you're looking at, focusing on the unified messaging one today and leaving the IP one for tomorrow is something that works very, very well. So as we talk about unified messaging itself, most of you have probably seen the famous screenshots and the demos of what goes on. And the concept's simple. We're going to put all our message types into one tool, the appropriate tool for wherever you happen to be. Now this is showing you the email tool. It just happens to be a Microsoft Outlook screenshot. It could just as easily be Notes or Eudora or Norvell GroupWise or any client you really want to talk about. And inside that inbox, what you see is voice messages, designated by the little telephone icon, fax messages by the little piece of paper, and regular email messages. And these are literally all processed in the same way. Not much of a learning curve for desktop unified messaging. You open up your inbox, you see a new message, you double-click it, that'll bring the message up, and we'll talk about playing that message in a second. But you notice even in the header lines, there's information about who sent you those messages, what type of messages they are. All of that's visual, and that aids in that triage of your mailbox that we all do as we kind of process work during the day. As we look at unified messaging, we're not going to focus that much on functionality. Functionality is probably within 10% the same in many of the competing products today. That's because we've been doing it all long enough to have kind of figured out what it is the customer wants. What we're going to spend a little more time on than functionality is the architecture used to deploy it. The architecture is kind of behind the scenes and it doesn't get much attention, but it turns out it's a fairly critical piece in your deployment of unified messaging. As you start putting new solutions into the enterprise, more and more of these solutions communicate with other solutions in your enterprise. And how they do that can be critical. So what we're going to look at with Call Express is its ability to do all the types of unified messaging architecture. We can mix any type of unified messaging architecture that exists on a single Call Express. We can have pure voicemail users and unified messaging users. Not all customers really need to convert everyone to unified messaging, and some systems require that. And not only is that a hassle, but it's also a licensing cost that you really don't want to incur if you're not getting any value for it. And then we'll take a look at the flexibility of getting unified messaging from the different devices. Call Express actually allows you to have a user who's fully unified at his email client, but when they call in over the phone, they just get voicemail. Or someone, when they call in over the phone, they get voicemail, fax, and email, but at the desktop, their email client's just an email client. The complete flexibility to tailor it not only per system, but per user. And then we're going to look at the various environments. We fit today with any email system, any phone system, any network architecture. We're completely flexible. We don't care if you have a single domain or multiple domains or an old phone system or a new phone system. Call Express is going to go in and leverage that existing investment, and you're going to be able to start getting the value of unified messaging. When the time comes to change any of these, though you can rest assured we support any email system changes you might make, any new phone system you might buy, and any network architecture. Perhaps you're going to acquire another company and suddenly you'll have two domains instead of one. That's not going to be a challenge for your unified messaging solution as long as it's from AVST. So let's take a look at these architectures. And these are simply different ways to connect your voicemail system, your telephone system, and your email system to deliver unified messaging functionality. There's really 4 ways it's done out in the market in general. This nice brochure our marketing department did up last year kind of talks about the 4 basic ways. We're going to look at each one of these so you understand them, and then we're going to talk about kind of what the implications are of doing one of these as opposed to the other. So let's start with server-based unified messaging. It's called server-based unified messaging because it actually unifies the messages on a single server. This is also sometimes called single message store unified messaging. And basically what this means is Call Express takes the voice messages and deposits them into the user's email inbox. The messages are now actually stored on the email server. Now the advantage of this is since they're in the email inbox, any tools the user is using with email, any deployment types that the customer's already done to support email, now leverage it and add voice to it. For example, you see them in your email client when you open up email. If you're using a BlackBerry Enterprise server or Good Technologies or Microsoft ActiveSync over the air to push real-time your email messages out to your users' mobile devices, they will now get their voice messages and their fax messages. If you're using cached mode or replication so that when travelers take their laptop offline, they have all their email messages, they'll now have all their voice and fax messages. And if they go and stop somewhere at an internet booth and bring up Outlook Web Access or iNotes or some type of web access to email, they will now also have web access to voice and fax messages. So it's a maximum leverage for the existing infrastructure, and it makes it the easiest one for people to use because they're usually deploying it and using it from a tool they already know. So the upside of this one is it is the most feature-rich, particularly for mobile people. It's the easiest to use for the client, and it does support the real-time push of voice and fax messages out to the mobile devices that are already getting email messages. Now there's 2 areas of discussion we have sometimes with customers where they have some concern about this architecture. And the first one, we don't see as much as we used to, but it's the impact on the email server and the network to put the messages in. And 5 years ago, this was actually a concern, and we would actually run network studies and talk about the storage requirements. But in today's world, when most people have a large number of email messages that have attachments with a very large size, that few voice messages you have tend to not really be very significant. An average voicemail message has about a 200, 250K attachment size to it. And people get anywhere from 3 to 10 of those messages, and it's not that much of an impact. We do still sometimes talk about that, but the second one tends to be the most important one. And this one's a little more difficult to address because it's not about information we have, it's about information no one has. There's a lot of things going on legally with various types of businesses that have to do with e-document policies and privacy. So if you look at HIPAA in the health industry, that's the Patients Privacy Act, it spells out what a good health industry company has to do to ensure that records, communications, everything having to do with the patient stays as private as possible. And FERPA does the same thing. If you look at FERPA for the educational industry, it's the same type of act. And Sarbanes-Oxley is the same thing, kind of a little more powerful even for public companies, where not only is privacy an issue, but you actually have requirements for maintaining records and making them available for disclosure. Now, all these documents completely ignore voicemail. None of them mentions voicemail at all. But there is some concern that if I put my voicemail into my email system, what does that mean? Does that mean I'm now covered? Are those voice messages subject to those same laws and regulations? And the answer is no one knows. Nobody's gone to court to spell out one way or another whether voice messages left in email fall under all these same guidelines or not. So it does make some corporate customers a little bit nervous. So for those customers, we recommend client-based unified messaging. With client-based unified messaging, we're going to leave the messages on Call Express. The voice and fax messages maintain their residence on their relevant servers, and we're going to unify them instead of at a server level, at a client level. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to take an email client that's already connected to the customer's email message store and build a second connection between that email client and the Call Express message store. Call Express becomes very similar to an IMAP email store in this case. So now from that one client, albeit in two different folders, I can now see my email messages in one folder and my voice and fax messages in another folder. For desktop users, this is very little difference between this and having server-based I can still open those messages and play them over the phone and play them over the speakers. I can build folders about projects I'm working on and drag voice, fax, and email messages into it. Very, very little difference. There is a difference for mobile users, though. Since the messages aren't stored in the email server, some of the tools that people have deployed to make email more effective won't automatically help with voicemail now. For instance, if you're using a BlackBerry server to push your email messages out to your mobile users, if we're not putting voice messages in the server, they're not going to get pushed to the BlackBerry device. So a little less productive for mobile users. The upside is it has less impact on the email server and the network, and there are less concerns from some people about HIPAA, Sarbanes-Oxley, FERPA, etc. We're not actually saying here that this is a better way to do this, that this has less legal implication, because nobody knows that. What we're doing is saying we can do it either way. If one way sounds better to you, then you can do it that way. Unlike any other system on the market, if you change your mind, you can change the type of that's deployed with the click of a button. So if you've gone ahead and rolled out ServerBased and you get down the road a little and in your industry or just your feelings in general are that it's not a good idea to store those on the email server anymore, the click of a button and you can go from server-based to client-based. And no other system can offer you that flexibility. And that's pretty nice to know in a changing legal infrastructure where there's some very, very cloudy areas out there. It's nice to know that you have the flexibility as a user to control that destiny yourself. The third type of we look at that's also licensed on Call Express is called Secure Unified Messaging. Now, Secure Unified Messaging was actually the result of the direct request from a number of our large enterprise customers who said, when we do desktop voice messaging, in other words, we use an email client to look at our voicemail, no matter what type we use, server or client, there's a problem in our eyes in that the end user can forward that voicemail message off-site. Now, prior to this, voicemail was accessed on the telephone, and it stayed inside the relative corporate firewall, and it was a corporate asset, so to speak. And now, with desktop messaging and an email client, there's nothing to stop employees from taking those messages, saving the attachments to a CD, or forwarding them off to their Hotmail account. And so we had customers that said, we really can't have that. What can you do for us? So we built a new type of unified messaging, Secure Unified Messaging. Messages stay on the Call Express server, and they're accessed with a web application. So what we've done is we've taken our web phone manager application, which prior to this was the web tool that users could go into to configure their mailbox, a nice graphical tool to help them set up their mailboxes. And we added to that the ability to view voice messages. So now a user can be set up so they can get their voice messages from their desktop or from the internet using this tool. What happens when they go to get that message is we use Microsoft streaming media to deliver it to the phone or to the speakers, but they cannot save a copy of that message, nor can they forward it off-site. So it's the most secure version of unified messaging. Messages remain on the voicemail server, and they can't be accessed. It's also a touchless install. It's turned out to be very popular for some companies because once they install the web application on their web server, basically there's nothing more to be done. There's no desktop visits, no software to be loaded, no configuration to worry about. It does run on a Microsoft Internet server. It runs on an Apache server. It's really technology independent. And it also works in browsers on Windows clients, Mac clients, Linux clients. It works on Safari, works on Firefox, it works on Internet Explorer. Very, very open standards type of solution. The only real downside here, I guess, is it's not really unifying all the messages in a single app, but it does give you that same functionality of handling from a desktop. Now, all three types of server-based, client-based, and secure, are available on Call Express. You don't buy them that way. You simply buy a license for users. Let's say you buy a license for several hundred users. The administrator can now configure those users for any of those three types as they'd like and change them anytime they want. So you're not locking yourself into anything in the way of architecture when you buy a Call Express. Those three types, completely interchangeable, and basically you can change them as many times as you want just by clicking a button. They can be assigned on a per-user basis or on a per-class of service basis. This last type of that we offer is in a separate category because it doesn't require a license. We call it Simplified Unified Messaging. So one of the things that Call Express is always focused on is message notification. You know, particularly for mobile people, you can't really process a message quickly if you don't know it's there. So we have a very powerful message notification engine. It includes the ability to dial out to numbers and pagers, various devices. You can have a list of up to 9 numbers, very, very flexible. Filters, so that you can only be notified of urgent messages or only messages of a certain type or only messages from a certain sender. And as an addition to that, we offer the ability to send out both email messages and SMS short text messages for notification. So I can configure my mailbox that whenever I get a voicemail to send me an email message telling me it's there. This was one of the ways we handled BlackBerry users in the early days when their devices weren't capable of playing voice messages on the phone. We would send them out an email and they'd hit click that link to that email and call in and get their message. As an option, you can set that email message that we send for notification to actually contain the voice message as an attachment. So what you end up with is 2 copies of the message. One still on Call Express that you manage with the normal Call Express tools, and a second over somewhere in email that they manage with the email tools. This is the only type of that gives you 2 copies of a message that have to be managed separately. And as a result, we do not charge you for this. So with Call Express, this type of is free for one or all users. We don't license users on Call Express, basic voicemail users. You can have as many as you want on the system, and every one of them can have this type of if you'd like. The pros and cons here are pretty simple. Less impact on the server and network. Very easy to support foreign email systems. If you have contractors or people that have email that's sort of outside your control, this is an ideal way to go. And the downside is it is the least feature-rich. You do have to sort of modify how you handle messages because now you have 2 copies of messages. If you look at our platform, one of the things we've done over the years, and not just in unified messaging, but in just about every area, is we've seen that the way the industry is going, solutions in the enterprise are going to be more and more about connectivity. Certainly, we've always connected the voicemail to the telephone system. Early on, we realized we had to put it on the local area network for a number of solutions. We wanted to connect it to the fax world. And then, slowly but surely, it's become apparent that communications-enabled business processes are going to be very important in the next few years. So starting almost 10 years ago, we started building Call Express software with integration layers. What that means is we can hook to lots of different types of telephone systems because we've abstracted that integration out to a layer of software that can be programmed very easily to talk to anything. We've abstracted the groupware layer. So we can not only connect to any email system, but a single Call Express can connect to multiple email systems of the same type or of different types. And then we've also extracted all the user interfaces. Certainly as a voicemail company that's been around this long, we started out with a simple DTMF interface where you could call in and get your voicemail. But that's grown today to support all the devices that users might want to access their messages with and all the different types of interfaces available on those devices. So we have a speech interface where users can call in and do all their message management and call management using a speech interface, and that helps you meet some of the laws that are being deployed in the states about hands-free access. We have a web interface where users can set up their mailbox and access their messages through the web. Because if you're portable, sometimes the web is the easiest tool to get to. We certainly have a number of desktop interfaces and a number of mobile interfaces, and the mobile interfaces are speech, DTMF, and data. There's a number of things we do to abstract that layer. And all of those wrap around the core applications that we provide, and those core applications are where we spend all of our time. These are rock-solid applications. They've been under development for almost 25 years. So call processing, voice messaging, unified messaging, fax, personal assistant, notification, all of those are in the core, and then all those abstraction layers let us communicate to the outside world. And this is not a process that's slowing down or stopping now. We could easily talk about how we need to connect this same functionality to other systems in your enterprise. Perhaps your customer database, or your office communication server, your presence and availability applications. This goes on, and that's our intention, is to use Call Express as the voice engine for all of these types of solutions. So if we look at all this information and we talk about, as a customer, if you're evaluating unified messaging, what is it you really need to be doing? And certainly, the nice demos and the brochures with the screenshots are all part of that process. But there's really 5 areas you want to look at and make sure that you're covering as you do these evaluations. And the first one's compliance. Oddly enough, there's these legal issues now that have to come into this play, and you need to make sure you don't lock yourself in to an architecture that might not work for you now or a few years down the road. If you don't have the flexibility to change those architectures, you really are sort of hoping that the way this turns out, the particular type that you're going to buy works. Every other vendor is going to lock you into one type of unified messaging architecture, which means if that's not the type for you down the road, you're going to be back out shopping again, probably sooner than you like. Even beyond the legal issues, the confidentiality issues are important. And once again, those different architectures give you different levels of control over how confidential you need those messages to be. Whether they need to be confidential because of your industry, healthcare and education, or because of the nature of your business. No matter what, you want to make sure you have that covered as you look at the different types of systems you might purchase. Configuration is important. If you buy a system that's made by a phone vendor, they spend all their time making it work with that phone system. As long as you never leave that phone system, you'll probably be okay. But if that phone system changes from growth, acquisition, and IP migration, you might suddenly find yourself with a system that's really not as functional as you'd like. So take a look at your architecture today, pick something that fits that architecture, but keep in mind that architecture changes as you go forward, and make sure whatever system you choose has the flexibility to match those changes. Then let's look at capacity, both from what you can get today and what you can grow to, but also how it affects the other solutions you have, how it affects the load on your server, your email server, your network. And in some environments where there's data connections out to remote sites, this gets to be a fairly complex process, which we'd be happy to talk through with you in terms of how to design an implementation that doesn't overload any of your capacities at all, plus gives you nice margin for growth. We all hope to grow as companies, and it'd be nice to be planning for that up front. And then, of course, last, and I don't even hardly need to put this one on the list because everyone looks at this one, is cost. But keep in mind, focus on the cost of ownership in an ongoing way, not just the acquisition cost. So there's certainly an acquisition cost, and you want to control that, but that's the really visible cost. There are other costs, like how complex is this system to maintain? How well can you distribute the administration over this system over multiple sites if that's your environment? How many licenses do you have to buy for your groupware package to deploy UM that maybe you're really not thinking of right now? A lot of those systems require a groupware license for every voicemail user. Now, a lot of your users have those licenses, but it's a good chance a lot of them don't. So the cost, capacity, configuration, confidentiality, and compliance are kind of the areas where you can build yourself a checklist to make sure you're covering everything, not just the nice brochure, the screenshot, and not just the nice demo. We can all do that. That's actually something the entire industry has figured out how to do now. But some of these other areas which aren't quite as clear are every bit as important in your consideration in terms of what you're going to do to employ somebody to give you a nice unified messaging solution. Well, I'd certainly like to thank everybody both for coming